Okay, it is 7 o'clock, Tuesday, October 30th, 2018, and uh, welcome to week five of introduction to criminal justice. And I told you that this quarter would go really, really, really fast. And so this is actually the week that you will hear me twice. And I'm going to remind you of that uh, today, that this is week five, and that, of course, all assignments are due this Sunday, except the posts. Initial posts, of course, are due tonight. Reply posts are due Saturday as normal. So we're going to point that out to you. So let's just get right into the module. Let me share my screen with you. And there we go. Okay, so you see my instructor information, all the stuff that I've gone over with you during week one, I won't go over again. I do remind several of you about Grammarly issues. Not a lot of you have had that issue, and so you want to make sure that you're on top of that. You can see that our live lecture, week five is the one that we're doing right now. But reminding you that this Friday, November 2nd, just a few days from now, just 3 days from now, 7:30, not 7 o'clock, but 7:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. Central Standard. And you might want to make sure that you tune in live to that one, because that's the final lecture, because the quarter ends next Tuesday. Next Tuesday, I think it is. Yeah, it does. It ends next Tuesday. So you want to be on top of that. So let's take a look at our announcement for this week. Sentencing and corrections, we will discuss. You should have read and received PowerPoints for chapters 9, 10, and 11. But I also sent you the ones for week 6 as well. But 9, 10, and 11 are for this week and out of your textbook. And then lecture notes, philosophy of corrections, what it's all about, a parole officer's point of view. We're going to give you that and let you listen to that video at the end, and then point out to you your practice activities. So your assignments for the week: to do a discussion assignment, community corrections versus incarceration. I'm going to talk about that a little bit tonight as well. And again, as I said, your initial post is due tonight at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and your reply post is due Saturday, 11 p.m. Central Standard Time. Finally, the written assignment, comparing jails and prisons, and then the quiz, which is timed. And I, again, encourage you to take the quiz on Sunday after you've gone through all the materials. Some of you have taken me up on it, some of you haven't, but that was my recommendation. Okay, and then, of course, those assignments are due Sunday. And then you know about my motto, adversity is the springboard to success. I shared that with you during week one. So let's take a look at the calendar real quick here. Here we go. And we are actually right here. As you can see, your reading assignment, your initial post, your lecture, and then again reminding you that this live lecture for week 6 is taking place on the 2nd. And then your reply post is due on the 3rd. And then your written assignment, your quiz and your written assignment are due the 4th. And then you'll see what I'll be talking about on Friday, but just a little taste of it, that your reading assignment for the week, I mean, you don't even have to wait until then. You can go into it after, as soon as you want to. But your initial post and reply post will be due at the same time, and then you have a final exam. And I'm going to talk about that, not tonight. I'll talk about that on Friday to give you some ideas. You should all be prepared. It's only 6 weeks in the quarter, and you should know how that's going to work. But anyway, I'm not going to elaborate on that. So let's go right into the module. Again, our assignments, repeating again to you. Your written assignment, 2 to 3 page paper, and addresses the following information at these 3 bullet points: citations and references. Says you must include proper citations, and then that you include in your paper. I always tell people they mess up by not putting citations in the body. They might put references at the end, and citations should be throughout the paper. Some of you got dinged on that, because here's the thing that you need to understand about writing papers. You are not an expert in the area. Even I, as an expert in the area, when I use information from a source, I will give credit to that source. I won't just throw it in at the end of the paper or in the middle of the paper. I put it where I use it. And it's important that you do so. And it is also important that you use credible resources, which you already know our rule on that. And then you should also be aware of the fact that your reference page, if you have 3 different references, those should be used as citations, maybe more than once, but at least once for each one. And it is very important. I can read statements, and I can tell that you got that information from someplace, because I'll read some of the things you say, and I'll say, okay, where'd this information come from? And I have students sometimes says, well, I read it, and I put in my own words. You still got the information from a source, and it gives credibility, and it also supports your statements. So that's what I've been saying over and over and over, so that you understand that. Okay, and then, of course, your rubric, you know how that works. And I told you that the rubric that I use for grading is basically the same one. I just combined the 2 top positions. Again, you guys have this guide. I hope you've used it. Continue to use it for your weekly written assignment. There's an online library to help you with your research, help you with APA, and then if you need tutoring and writing lab, and it tells you what you need. So again, let's just take a quick look at what the gradebook rubric looks like. Do this Sunday the 4th. Let's look at it again, and you'll see that there's 20 points, and I've combined the 2 10 points together to get to 20. It's no difference. And it tells the minimum requirements, not 1.5 pages. So student asked me once, if I go over the number of pages, will I be dinged? No, you will not. I don't, take points away from people for additional information. I welcome that. And then, of course, this is always exactly the same, and it tells you about your paragraphing, your grammar, and things of that nature. And then your APA citations and references. This is a course where you get 2 points off, but in your rest of your courses, you're going to find that you're going to get more points off, because we give you a break when you first come in, introduction to the program, and that equals 25 points. So you want to make sure that you satisfy all of these requirements. Make sure that you read these things. Don't just say, oh yeah, I already know. I can tell if you already know by your papers when I do grade them. All right? So that's your written assignment. and then you know how to do it. And then, of course, I'll just say this because most of you don't have a problem with it. Make sure it's a Word document, not a PDF. A few people have submitted PDF. Notice it says, save your assignment as a Microsoft Word document, and it tells you how to do that. And you guys know how to do this at this point. But some have sent me PDFs, and I give you a 0 and tell you to resubmit it so that you can get a grade on it, because I can't grade it because I can't determine the information and Grammarly that I need to run into. Your posts go without saying. I'm not going to read those. And then, of course, your quiz. Okay? Then, of course, your live lecture, you know, to get your points. All right? So now let's go back. And let's spend the rest of the time talking about the content of this lesson. You already know what the topics are: sentencing and jail versus prison. Okay? So now we have lecture notes, which I'm going to talk about, and then the parole officer's point of view. That's a video that I'm going to give you at the end. So let's talk about what corrections is all about. First of all, corrections you should be aware of is to correct. That's the root word for corrections, to correct someone. And so what has happened is that an individual has either been found guilty or pled guilty and is convicted as a result of a crime. So there is a penalty that that individual pays, and so then you're turned over into corrections. Now remember, there are several phases in corrections in criminal justice, but we get to corrections. The first phase is where you deal with the law enforcement aspects, where the police are involved and so forth. And then you have the court aspects of it. And then depending on what happens in court is whether or not it reaches the third section, which is corrections. And corrections involve several things. And so you should be aware of the fact that states determine your term of corrections by the seriousness of the offense. For example, a felony is longer than a misdemeanor. Does anybody know just let me know, how do you know what's a felony? How do you know that something is a felony? How do you know that a crime is a felony? What is it that you can tell me, and you can type it in the chat box, I'll see it, that lets me know it's a felony? What is it? What do you know about the crime or the sentence that lets you know it's a felony? What do you know? You should know by now. The difference between a felony and a misdemeanor. So what is a felony? Should have had this way back in the beginning, and I've talked about this before. So what is a felony? Is a felony a serious offense as opposed to a misdemeanor? Yes or no? You can type that in the chat box. Nobody wants to take it on? Okay. Well, actually, I'll tell you then. A felony is an offense for which you go to jail a year and a day and above. And it is the most serious offenses. And generally, felonies send you to prison as opposed to jail. Misdemeanors are less than a year, up to a year, then that's a misdemeanor. And so each of these different variations can send you to incarceration, maybe. And so states set in the statutes, what examples, what kind of punishment you get based upon state laws. Congress has the same thing for federal laws. So, as I said, once a person is found guilty or convicted or pleads guilty, the extent of their punishment takes place. And punishment is based upon not violating the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution, which says that you should not be subjected to cruel punishments. And, they talk about some things here: drownings, crucifixions, beheading, dismemberment, and burning at the stake. These are cruel. However, though, there are people who are electrocuted. The death penalty is not cruel and unusual punishment per se. In fact, there was a famous case, Furman versus Georgia, in 1972, I believe it was, that came out that said that the death penalty is not unconstitutional, but that the states had to provide protections for individuals who were found guilty. And then, as you know, there are jurisdictions such as Illinois, which does not have a death penalty. Wisconsin does not have a death penalty. And so an individual can only, the most the person can be sentenced to is natural life, but not the death penalty in that. But it depends upon the states. And so anyway, the key thing is that we don't make a mockery out of punishment. Government officials have different theories. For example, one of the most common ones that was probably an older one, and people still talk about it now, is to discourage someone or deter them. So they came up with the theory of deterrence, and says that an individual is sentenced on the theory that they would think about the crime, or that they wouldn't commit the crime because they know that if they do that, they're going to serve some time. And so it should reduce recidivism. It should impact the individual to make them think before they commit a crime. But you should be aware that studies have demonstrated that deterrence is not the theory that really helps our criminal justice system or corrections. Those individuals are only deterred during the period of time they're incarcerated, and then they come back out and they go back to what they did. As a matter of fact, to be honest with you, we have discovered that when individuals are incarcerated, that they're not deterred, but they come back out more of a criminal because they will be subjected to some time if they go to prison or either in jail itself, that they will find themselves in a situation where they are exposed to people who either have extended long terms and they pick up their habits, or they pick up habits to survive while they're incarcerated, and when they come out, that's how they respond. So it really doesn't. The whole theory of the death penalty is not a deterrent factor. In fact, statistics and studies have demonstrated time and time again that the only individual that is deterred from committing a crime is the person who is executed. Of course, that makes sense because they're not alive anymore. However, though, those people who are looking at the crimes that the people commit don't stop and say, you know what, if I commit this crime, I'm going to get this much time. That's not the general process that takes place. And so we come to the point of another process of what we call an eye for an eye, where it's called retribution, where that individual finds themselves receiving severe punishment for severe crimes. And the principle puts the individual to the point that if they disobey the law, then the sentence presumes that the person would choose to avoid the acts due to severe and cruel punishment and therefore not become a recidivist. That doesn't work very well either because of the reasons that I stated earlier that apply. And so we find another theory of the third of the four theories is to incapacitate them or incarcerate. And so those individuals are sentenced and they are separated from the community, and that it eliminates or reduces the crime while they're incarcerated or incapacitation. However, because of what I said earlier, they come back out either going to be worse or more of a criminal than they were when they went in. And you will discover that individuals who are wrongfully convicted and they end up serving long periods of time will come out and they will pick up those habits that I talked about earlier. And then they will become criminals for real. In most cases, or in many cases, the habits that they develop while they're incarcerated for extended periods of time. So now, and all these three that I mentioned, deterrence, retribution, and incapacitation, each of these three are more punitive, more towards punishing. It's like what we do when kids do something wrong, we issue out punishment. You're on punishment. And that means that, you're either grounded or something is taken away from you. Well, in this case, your freedom is taken away from you. And so those individuals are sent into the place. Now, originally, you should know that prison, which is the longest period of time, and jail is a short period of time, or either where the place is while they're awaiting trial. But you should be aware that prison at first was called the penitentiary, and a lot of people still use it. But it's short for penitent. And what it meant is it subjected that individual to a period where they should be reflecting upon what they did. And so all in all, the idea was to give that person a chance to reflect upon the things that they did wrong, and then determine that based upon that removal of freedom and liberty that they had before, certain rights and privileges, that they will not want to go through that all over again. And so because we see that the jails continue to see the same people, I can tell you that in my years, I started practicing as a lawyer in 1978, but I actually started working with lawyers when I came out of high school in 1969. But I really got exposed to the working in the criminal system with some of the lawyers in the law firm that I was working for. That was a corporate firm, but they did criminal stuff. About, I'd say, I graduated in 75 from college, about 73, 72. So I started sometimes even going to jail and prisons with the lawyers to see how things worked. And so what I'm going to tell you is that from those years, and let's start from the years of 78 when I started practicing until I retired in 2000, I can tell you that between those years that individuals that I represented would be repeat offenders. They would get out, they would commit a crime, come back, go back in, and some of them didn't make it. Some of them were killed during that period of time. The other thing is this, is that even generations, I represented individuals, and then I represented their kids in juvenile court, and then some of them when they reached adult court. So the point of the matter is, and other cousins, relatives, and so forth. In other words, what I am saying is this, is that it became a culture of criminals And so these these kids would see the people going to jail, and so it wasn't working. The deterrent factor wasn't working. The retribution wasn't working. The incapacitation wasn't working at all. Now we get to the contrast, and we deal with rehabilitation. Now I don't have it a secret. I share with all of my students that rehabilitation is the best method for helping somebody. When you rehab or rehabilitate somebody or something, you're pointing them in another direction, and you're taking those individuals and you are addressing the causes of the behavior, such as drugs, alcohol, vocation, education. You're giving individuals an opportunity to get help in those areas. And so, therefore, people begin to go in a new direction. I was part of a program that I mentioned in the discussion post called Probation Challenge, where one of the judges that I had, he was a felon. It was a felony courtroom, where individuals who came before the judge who had not received their high school diplomas, and the offenses were not violent offenses, but that those individuals would qualify for probation. Then those individuals were given the opportunity to choose between going into a program called Probation Challenge, where they would go through a structured program and work on obtaining their GED. Upon successfully obtaining their GED, of course, they were focusing on doing that and stayed out of trouble. Those individuals would then come back before the court, and the case would be shut down or dismissed. Awesome concept. And the reason why that was a successful program until the budgetary issues came about, because we determined that it is cheaper to educate than to incarcerate. And so, I heard somebody say a very stupid thing once. They said, so then if we're going to do that, we're going to offer them education, man, people are going to commit crimes to go to jail so they can get a free education. I put idiot under that person's picture. Because that's just a dumb statement. It doesn't make any sense at all. You look at them and like, what they're not thinking. And so anyway, the point of the matter is I can tell you that many of those individuals that were males and females that got into the program, listen to this, not only did they get their GED, but many of them went on and we were affiliated with a City College of Chicago junior college called Olive Harvey College, and students were allowed to register and take classes. And some went as far as not only getting their associates, but they went and got their bachelors. Now, all this time, so they're going in a new direction. They didn't have the time to be out here committing the crimes. So those are good things. The other thing that's necessary is, of course, you can educate someone all day and all night. If they have a drug problem, if you don't deal with the issues of getting that person the help that they need, they're going to come back out and they're going to commit the crimes. We already know, and those of you who will be seeing me in maybe a week or so in J100, which I teach drugs and crime, there is a strong correlation between drugs and crime. People commit crimes to support their drug habits. And so as a result, those individuals need help, as well as dealing with alcohol addiction as well. And then the other thing are those individuals who don't have either of those problems, but they want to do something with their hands, or they want a trade or vocation, providing vocational training and things of that nature. There are many jurisdictions, including Illinois, which has what we call second chance programs, where individuals have organizations or companies that are willing to hire people who have been placed in the criminal justice system to give them a second chance. And some of those people, and not all. See, now here's the deal. I hate to hear a person come to me and says, well, rehabilitation doesn't help everybody. There's no such thing as something that helps everybody. There's no cookie cutter thing, okay? There's no stereotyping. As my grandmother used to have this saying, every tub has to stand on its own bottom. In other words, you make your own choices, just like you do in school. You make the decision as to whether or not you're going to study hard and work this thing through and do all of the requirements, no matter how difficult, no matter how hard, and you will achieve success and end up on the Dean's List honor roll, get an A. And consequently, you will get the better jobs. But that's a choice, guys. Not everybody in school is going to achieve that. I've been teaching long enough. I've been teaching grammar school and also high school, but teaching Rasmussen since 2011. And I can tell you that is an issue. So rehabilitation deals with providing services to help that individual and to take them in a new direction. Finally, the result is restoration. Now, here's restoration or restorative justice. Now, I already gave you those others, but restorative justice kind of fits in with rehabilitation. And you had to do a paper in week number 3 about restorative justice, and you know what that is. And what it does as a whole, it allows the individual to participate in programs like what I talked about, or either they might deal with community service. And, for example, if a person commits a hate crime, and that individual might be subjected to work with an organization, like, for example, if a person commits a hate crime against an African American, they may have to work with the NAACP, Operation Push, or Breadbasket. I'm dating myself. Operation Push, or some community type organization. The idea is to get them to see and learn more about the harm to the victim and what their actions did. And so the idea is to take that individual who harmed someone and then let them give back to the community or to the individuals. And so this is incorporated in the process, restores that individual and puts them in a position. So those are the philosophies that take place when it comes to sentencing. Now, in the process, the judge, of course, has the authority. Now, you know and I know that there are jurisdictions that have determinate sentencing, such as Illinois, which means that the legislature will put a minimum and a maximum. That means the judge has some authority, but the judge must sentence that person within the range of the minimum or the maximum. Class X felonies, for example. When I was in law school, I participated in the first major change of the Illinois Criminal Code of 1961 that took place in 1977 and completed in 1978 that changed sentencing to replicate more of what the crime is. And we came up with this thing called Class X felonies, and some of you have written about that. The Class X felonies mean that if you commit these offenses, you will be sentenced to a minimum of 6 to 30 years. Now, originally when it was done, they still had good time and day for a day where the sentence actually was cut in half. They don't do that anymore. So 6 means 6 and 30 means 30. And so the individual is sentenced based upon that. And the judge can't give the person probation. Okay. So now, before a sentence is issued out, which is the second phase of an individual pleading guilty, there is what we call a sentencing hearing. At that hearing, one of the first things that's done is we order what we call a PSI, or a pre-sentence investigation. And the pre-sentence investigation is done by the probation department, and it provides the history of that individual's contact in the criminal justice system, lets the judge, the attorneys, and the probation officer, but primarily the judge and the attorneys, get an idea about what kind of sentence that individual should receive within the range of the sentences, and whether or not that person can get some rehabilitation based upon the offenses. Now, a person can still end up with a Class X felony and still get some rehabilitation, except one difference. They'll be incarcerated when they do it and not subjected to probation, okay? So then the court will receive the recommendations, and the courts look at the PSI and determine based on that. Now, during the time of sentencing, the prosecution presents what they want, and the defense presents what they want, and sometimes the judge will meet them in the middle. Now, during that hearing, witnesses are called. And the reason why witnesses are called, first of all, the prosecution will present what we call victim impact statements, or statements from the family saying what effect that this person's offense has caused them. And they will be in the form of written statements that are read in court, and they are on the stand. And so these provide what we call aggravating circumstances. When you aggravate something, what you're saying is that you're opting for more than the minimum, and you want a person to get as close to the maximum as you possibly can. Mitigating circumstances are called by the defense, and they provide testimony of the character of the individual, the life of that individual, gleaning information that they obtain from the pre-sentence investigation. They will have individuals, maybe family members, friends, neighbors, their religious leaders, or social organizations that they are involved in, to come in and provide information. And so then after all of that, then the judge will follow what the statute says, and give an example here. It says a conviction for shoplifting of a $20 shirt is likely to be a misdemeanor. Yeah, that would be, and the maximum sentence would probably be 30 days and or a fine of $1,000, even though you can get up to a year. But usually if it's for a $20 shirt, then the individual might get 30 days in jail, or either they may just get probation. And so, and it says here, some statutes require the judge to impose a mandatory or fixed term of jail. I talked about that already. And so included in the sentence, there are variations that take place, such as fines. I told you about this: community service, probation, jail, prison, and death. And so you should know, again, the difference between probation and parole. With probation, you don't go to jail. You serve your time outside of jail under the requirements of what the probation officer has and that the judge has issued out. The conditions have to be satisfied. With parole, you serve some time in prison, and then you are released on parole to serve the rest of the sentence outside. Now, with probation, you should be aware too that you remain on what we call paper, and what that means, that's a term that we use in the field. But what it really means is that you're under the supervision of the probation or parole officer, and that you have to satisfy those conditions. If you violate them, then the probation or parole officer can bring what we call a VOP, violation of parole, if it's parole, violation of probation, and you can be brought back to maybe possibly be incarcerated and serve out the remainder of your time behind bars. So there are a range of sentences, prison, and then the death penalty. We already talked about that. So probation, parole, and community services are what we talked about, community corrections, because you are in the community rather than behind bars. Okay. Finally, one of the issues of sentences and challenges is you have to come back into the community. As you know already, jails are overcrowded because people keep committing offenses and going back. Also, there are budgetary issues as well. And, you know, it talks about housing inmates in jails cost money to provide supervision and protection, housing, medical care, food, clothing. For example, the average cost of housing a male inmate in North Dakota is $42,460. Think about that. Education for that individual is much cheaper than that and more beneficial to society and the community. And then it gives some statistics that I'm not going to go over that talks about the cost per day and things like that. You know, but there's definitely all kinds of issues that the individual faces with overcrowding. There's dangers that the individuals face as well. And there are times when individuals, as it says here, are incarcerated for certain drug crimes or nonviolent offenses, and they become worse rather than better. Correctional professionals at all levels deal with all the alternatives, and such as drug court, military veteran courts, or there's a thing called boot camp, where a person is sent off into a military situation, and sometimes that helps harden individuals to become more focused as well. And so that's how all of that works. Okay, so now for the next 8 minutes, I want to put this video on of a parole and probation officer's point of view, so you can see how that works. All right. So let me take off my headphones. So now you should be able to hear it. I'm going to shut off my camera while I'm at it. So listen up very carefully.
Yeah, my name is Cliff Williams, and I'm recently promoted to a correctional probation specialist with the Florida Department of Corrections, Probation and Parole. I've been with the department approximately 9 years. Up until this last week here, I was a correctional probation senior officer, supervising house arrest offenders, which are people that are actually placed on supervision and assigned to be at their home 24/7. Before that, I was a correctional probation officer, line officer, which supervised a little bit of everything, burglaries, thefts, so on. Started criminal justice. I got an associate's degree from Vincent University in 1999. Went to Ball State University, got a bachelor's of criminal justice, and got hired on with the Muncie Police Department in Indiana. Worked for a police officer for 2 years. Transferred down here to University of South Florida, got a master's in criminal justice administration, and started my career here as probation and parole. Been there ever since. They actually offenders come in the office once a month. You go out to their house once a month on regular supervision. So you're making 2 contacts a month. You make employment verifications. You want to make sure they actually are employed. They have a monthly contact sheet they come in and fill out, and you want to verify all the information on there. If they have any kind of new arrest or violation of probation, we submit violations to the judges, and they decide whether or not they want to sign a warrant. If they sign a warrant, we can go out with the sheriff's office and perform the arrest, or we can assign to the sheriff's office and go that way. As a senior officer, you are more specialized. There's drug offender probation, which defenders are just on probation for drug offenses. There's some kind of a drug prior in their background. Those type of offenders, they're placed on the color code, which every day different colors called home. They will have to come in and do urine assessment. There's also house arrest, which I've done the last couple of years, and those offenders must be home 24 hours a day. They are allowed to work. You have to verify if they are working. Do curfews on them. Some of those offenders may have an ankle bracelet or GPS system. Not all do. It's strictly up to the judge if he just decides they are a greater threat to the community or not. We also have a youthful offender officer. Anybody who is considered by the court to be judged as an adult, but they are usually youth, as in 17, 16. They can be placed on probation as well. They're usually sentenced to a youthful offender officer, which can understand more about a younger offender. Like I said, just about a week ago, I got promoted to correctional probation specialist. It's a high-risk supervision caseload, which means anybody high or anyone high profile gets assigned to a specialist. Most of your sex offenders that are on GPS or any kind of a specialized caseload, they get assigned to specialists. That's our title. Your typical days, I may go in the office for a couple hours, check on everything, run some arrest reports, if any of my offenders were arrested for anything. Generally, check messages because you have offenders that may say they have to move immediately if there's some domestic violence in their house or anything that's going on that may put them in jeopardy of the probation. So I'll usually go in for a couple hours, make a travel itinerary. The best plan, I'm going to go out and see my offenders. I may spend several hours in the field. We may make our own schedules, so therefore we may not even go in the office at all one day. We may just go directly in the field from our house and start seeing offenders. Things may come up. We may have a law enforcement officer call and say, hey, I need to do a search, or we believe someone's in this house, and the house owner is on probation. They may call us to assist. We have the authority to go into our offenders' houses 24 hours a day. We have access that law enforcement officers do not. Our search powers are a lot broader than law enforcement officers. We can search our offenders at any time, anywhere they are. We can go in. We have to have access to our offenders 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Law enforcement officers have to abide by, obviously, more of a civil rights issue. Offenders under the supervision, they have given up some of those rights. We have those powers to go in where they are, anytime. And while we work closely with narcotics, warrants, like people like that, we can go in and search for drugs. I've worked with the juvenile probation and parole people, the people that they suspect there's a juvenile living in the house or something they can't get access to, but we have an offender under supervision. We'll go in and see if there's, a kid that's been kidnapped, run away, any situation you can think of, we work out directly with law enforcement day to day. As far as serving any warrants, we can go out and serve our own warrants. Usually we'll get several officers together, go out and surround the house. We're issued, full body armor. We issue, we carry pepper spray, firearms, flashlight, typical stuff that any law enforcement officer gets issued. We go out there and we serve our own warrants, or we may call the sheriff's office to assist. I mean, it just depends. Depends on what situation you're in. If you feel comfortable, we go out and handle ourselves. If we need backup, we call local agencies to help us out as well. got to understand, um, in law enforcement, you may just go out and make an arrest and go home. We deal with these people. You may deal with them for months. You may deal with them for years. We have people that are on for life, and you may be dealing with these people. You're going to know the offender more than anybody else does, more than the judge does, more than a law enforcement officer on the street. So you got to be a people person, but you also got to have the law enforcement background. You also have to have a people person perspective of it. In order to be a probation patrol officer, you have to have a bachelor's degree to apply. Um, we look for people who have obviously criminal justice experience or criminal justice degree. You can come directly out of school and become a probation patrol officer. You don't have to have been a police officer or anything as long as you have the degree. Um, obviously, we want people that you're going to be dealing with people that commit crimes. You're dealing with the same people corrections officers deal with. You deal with the same people law enforcement officers deal with. There's three different types of law enforcement in Florida, and we are considered law enforcement officers. So you're going to be out there in the thick of things as well as any professional law enforcement.
Okay. Okay. So that's how that works. And so you want to make sure that you pay close attention. Notice that they require the degree, the 4-year degree for parole and probation. Law enforcement itself, does not require 4-year degrees, but most departments now are moving in that direction, and especially state police. And some jurisdictions won't even hire you unless you have those, because they're setting up a more professional department. So then you're going to go ahead and do these practice things, dealing with these questions. And, I'm not going to spend time going over them, and then, you know how they work. So you want to make sure that you do that. Okay? So that is it for today. I do want to say to you that remind you again, this Friday at 7:30, there will be a final lecture that takes place, and you want to be there for that. So today, I'm going to give you a word that will help you get your points. It's criminal sentence. Criminal sentence. And that's it. So looks like there are no questions from anybody. If there are, I would have seen them in the chat box. And so I hope to see you guys on Friday when we do the final lecture from from 7:30 to 8:30. So with that, I'm going to end this session and say good night.